I call the December 13th meeting of the Iowa City Board of Adjustment to order. May we have roll call?
Baker.
Here.
Carlson.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Russo.
Here.
Swigert.
Here. Okay, so the first order of business is consideration of the amendments to the Board of Adjustment bylaws. So if you want to fill us in on that.
Yeah, so really what we're looking at is a bunch of minor changes, terminology, the way that headings are structured, et cetera. But there are two general sets of more substantive changes that I laid out in my memo. I'll kind of cover those very briefly as to what we're proposing. So the first came about because we've had some appeals recently, and we realized that the appeal order is a little off from what you would expect, where you would expect the appellant or the appellant, however you pronounce it, to make their case first, and then it would kind of be the staff case, and then it would go from there. So the Section 8 hearing order in Article 6, Section 8 is the one that we would still retain for special exceptions and variances, which are the bulk of our applications. A note that we did move the board may request additional comments to this section rather than having it after the hearing is closed, since you can't have that during the hearing. And then we would add a Section 9 to that article that would create a similar setup for appeals, but it would be slightly different in that there'd be a brief introduction by the secretary of the board, and then it would be the appellant presentation, and then it would be the staff presentation on the administrative decision being appealed. So otherwise it follows the same general layout as the special exception and variance hearing order, but it's just a little different for appeals. The next change is trying to convert from business days to calendar days throughout. There are really several different sections where that occurs. So the first would be in Article 4, Sections 2 and 5, Article 5, Section 1, 2, and 3, and then Article 8, Section 5. So with regard to Article 5, that is a case where we would transition from business days to calendar days, but the number would be the same. So Article 5 is related to public hearing notices, and the goal for this change is to reduce administrative error and ensure consistency of city notice timeframes. It's based on what is currently in the city code for BOA notices. So within our code right now, online, it knows that public hearing notices must be 7 days prior to a hearing, but the bylaws changes that to business days. So it does lead to a little bit of confusion where, for inexperienced staff, that could be problematic. It has the potential to lead to error, and calendar days are more consistent with our other notice time frames for planning applications. So you'll see that in our good neighbor policies. You'll see it in pretty much every other policy. With regards to Article 4 and 8, those are changing from business days to calendar days as well. But in that case, we do convert the number of days. So for example, 5 business days would be converted to 7 calendar days. 10 business days would be approximately 15 calendar days. In this case, these conversions are happening so that we do have a consistent time frame, and some are not calendar days and some are business days. But the goal is not to modify it to be similar to any other time frames in it, unlike for the notices that we have in our code. So neither of them is intended to change the intent of it. Generally, we have no problems getting out our notices in time. We have no problems with the appeals. We don't want to shorten those lengths or anything. But it does lead to a slight change with those Article 5 changes regarding notice. So those are really, that's all I have in terms of the presentation. It's not a lot, but those are the changes that we included in it. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about why I did one thing or another, or am recommending one or another.
Okay, so do you want us to discuss those two things first and then to ask questions about any of the other sections that we have questions about?
Sure.
does anybody have any questions or comments on that one, or on the two things that Kirk just talked about, the appeal order and the counting of days?
No question.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so then let's look at the rest of them. Is there anything in Article 2, a membership? Are there any questions for any of those sections? Do we agree on all of those?
Or changes you'd like to see that staff did not point out, too. I mean, if you have changes as a board in any of these provisions.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do that now when you're going through, or the third round, but keep in mind, you can make changes as well.
Okay, yeah, no. Okay, so does anybody have any questions or want to make any changes in Article 2 on membership? Does everyone agree with that? All of that? And the officers? Okay.
Well, no, I have a question in
Okay.
this section. And it ties in with my questions about minutes. So it's kind of the whole thing. In the officers, it says, "The board secretary shall be a staff person who is appointed by the Director of Neighborhood and Development Services." So who is the board secretary?
I am. So I publish all the notices, I keep all the minutes, et cetera.
Okay. So then, it makes me wonder, the section that, for the new order of procedure for an appeal. Do you have that in your slides?
I can pull it up right here. Let me share that so Bryce can also see it. Okay.
So the number one is a brief introduction by the secretary of the board. So that's you,
Correct.
or whoever is
The secretary.
taking your place if you're not here, right? Okay. And then number three is staff presentation on grounds, so that would be the board secretary again?
Most likely not.
Okay.
So the way that it would generally work is the secretary is more than likely going to be independent from the person that is representing the city or the person that makes the decision. So often that's the building official. So in terms of our most recent appeal that we had with the front setback question, Danielle, our development services coordinator, is also the building official. She's the one who made the determination to issue the building permit that was being appealed. So she represents the city in that case, and I, as the board secretary in that case, was acting as the secretary of the board. So it's mostly in terms of the secretary of the board can provide an orientation, a general orientation about, this is the property that we're talking about. And then at that point, it would turn over to the appellant to make their case as to why they believe a decision should be overturned.
So in the case that we had, Danielle was staff presentation, she was number 3?
Correct.
Okay.
And
You were,
I believe that I essentially flashed up location maps and a zoning map. I think I did that for our recent appeals. I mean, that's kind of what I imagine that first orientation being, just so that you're familiar with what's happening, because an appellant may not give you the full context of, this is the zoning of the property that. So those sorts of kind of more technical background things
Okay.
we would want to make sure you're aware of before they present.
Yeah, without advocating that the city was correct because of reasons 1, 2, and 3.
Exactly. It's
Right.
an orientation. It's not a presentation as to this is why I believe it's correct.
okay.
Or at least that's what it's intended to be.
Okay. So this is kind of still tied in. Who actually creates the minutes?
The minutes are created by a minute taker, and then I review them.
Okay. As secretary for the board?
Correct. So I review them for accuracy, mostly. They typically do a pretty good job. We've got a great minute taker, so we're thankful for that.
Okay. And then, so under what circumstances would you forward to city council the minutes without having approval by the board?
So typically, I forward the preliminary minutes that are prepared, and that would be included in your packet for approval, and then I also forward the final minutes. I send those to the city clerk. I don't know what the city clerk sends forward, honestly.
Right. So draft minutes will be in the information packet that goes out every Thursday for all boards and commissions. That's where you'll see a draft or a preliminary minute. Once the board or commission, whichever one we're talking about, approves it, it goes to city council for approval, and it's part of the agenda packet. So they get it then, yes.
Okay.
So they get both.
Right.
Okay. All right, those are I just wanted to follow through that process of who's the board secretary,
Yeah.
first of all. All right, thank you.
So this meeting is recorded, and then someone takes minutes off of that recording, is that it?
Correct.
So they aren't present?
No. No, they basically have access to the Zoom, and then I review what they produce to make sure that it's full and complete and accurate, and then you guys review my work.
Might want to tweak it like tonight.
We'll see. Should be a simple one, straightforward.
No, I mean the minutes.
Well, I already complimented our minute taker, so maybe I should do that a couple more times.
She does she does a fabulous job, believe me. I've done stuff like this, and it's fantastic. I just have a tweak.
I have a couple questions on the notice letters and the notice signs and the fact that it's no less than 7 days. So how much time do you usually try to put it on, send out the letters and put the signs in the yard? Because 7 days, it says no less than. 7 days is, that's pretty tight. And a lot of people have a lot of other things going on, and that's, when I see things like that, that makes me nervous. They probably will not respond to it, but I want to make sure that the public knows about these things, so they do have the opportunity to do something about it if they want to.
Sure. So, like I said, we don't really have any problems meeting these timelines as they are. Our typical process is we get an application, we put out the sign immediately, so I think it's 40 days in advance. The letters usually go out pretty early. I would say it generally somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks in advance. The public notice is around a similar time frame, but a public notice specifically can't be published more than 20 calendar days in advance. So I've almost run into situations where I accidentally posted too early. Almost. I did not. But so usually there's 2 to 3 weeks that people have to react to these things. And then we publish the packet that Friday before. So that's the general process.
So how is this process in relation to the process for other commissions? Like planning and zoning, because I assume what you're trying to do to some extent is to make all of these boards have the same days and things. But as I said, 7 days is pretty short.
So P&Z largely depends on when things come in and how fast they need to be processed, I would say 2 weeks is pretty typical for most cases, and the sign goes out pretty much immediately upon receiving an application. So sometimes it can be 7 days if something changes or there's we're not expecting something to be on agenda because we don't think it's going to be ready, and then suddenly it's ready, and okay, we've got to get this going and send out the letter. That happens sometimes, but other than that, that's really how that works.
So.
And for,
Well, it would also be for historic preservation. I mean, there are other commissions and stuff. So I realize that we don't want to change things for this commission that make it difficult for other commissions to confuse people.
well, we also, the Board of Adjustment is unusual in that our requirements are in our bylaws. I think we're the only commission that actually has that.
Okay.
I think a lot of the other ones are based on our policy, not based on bylaws. So there's not always this much specificity in how they are. I'm trying to look up a zoning code amendment as an example. But let's see. I know that, for example, within our code section for the Board of Adjustment, it says specifically seven calendar days is when you have to post the notice. I actually don't think the letters are included they're not codified anywhere, I don't think, other than in our city policies. That's my understanding of it. But, I mean, my goal is mostly to try and make sure that, if nothing else, our bylaws match our code. If there is a preferred change or if we want a different timeline, that's something that's possible to do. But those changes to code are at the discretion of city council typically.
Okay, so with 7 days, if someone didn't like the ruling, could they come back on us and say, I feel that there was not enough time given for public notice for people to respond to this?
I doubt it, because the state code, almost all notices are, as Kirk said, minimum 4, maximum 20. You don't want to give people 6 months' notice
No,
because
no.
you get lost in the shuffle.
No.
Likewise, you don't want to give them 24 hours' notice. And so the state code has a 40-20 on almost everything, but I think there's recently public bidding changed a little bit on some big construction projects. But other than that, it's 40-20.
Yeah, and in terms of
Or
publishing the packet, actually, that only requires 24 hours
4
notice.
hours notice,
By
right.
state code. So we do somewhat more than what's the minimum required. So there's not really a legal grounds for them to say I didn't have enough time.
I just want to, I'm involved in dealing with a very complicated lease. And so when these days suddenly become very important, you do not realize the implications that can be had by that. And so
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah,
is
no.
To make sure that we are doing what we need to do to notify the public and also to protect ourselves, so that someone that can't come back and say we didn't notify them in a timely way.
Yeah, that's fair. And it is possible for you to keep longer timeframes in your bylaws as well. So if that's something where, like the way that we convert 5 business days to 7 calendar days, you could convert 7 business days to, I guess it would be 9 calendar days or 10 calendar days,
I
whatever.
think there was one instance where you did convert the business days to a longer number of, I think it was 10 calendar.
I did that for everything in Articles 4 and 8, which is the sections on, there's sections on the timelines in which you could make appeals, and there's sections on the timelines in which an applicant could request reconsideration. I didn't do it for notices just because our code has a different time frame, and I wanted to try and standardize that somewhat more.
That's fine. Okay, I have a strange question then on the board voting, and this is my own curiosity. A board member may abstain from voting, which is a non-vote. I had never heard of this. So when would this occur?
Typically, you don't see it. Other than a recusal, if it's something where I suppose one of you doesn't feel you could make an informed decision. Let's say that like one person felt like there wasn't enough info, they requested more info. The rest of the board determined that there was enough to move forward, and the person said, I don't think I can make a vote, I'm going to abstain. I feel like that's basically the only situation that I could imagine. I don't think it's something that really happens much.
I read that and I go, well, this is a new one on me that I didn't know
and
anything about.
I've never, is there such a thing as 3 people abstaining where a decision can't be reached?
No, about 10 or 15, 20 years ago, there was a city council member that abstained quite a bit, and actually council then passed a resolution that said if you abstain, it's a no vote.
Oh, okay.
That's why it means a non-vote. It would be just like a recusal.
Oh,
There would be
okay.
just
Yeah.
4 persons. It's
Yeah.
not an automatic no. Right?
Is that a city council rule or is that across city?
No, that was just a
Boards
city
and-
council resolution. And that really hasn't happened since that person left the city council, but it was obviously a problematic issue to other members of the council.
Or you'll hear about it usually it's not in Board of Adjustment context, but like the UN, you hear people recusing if they don't want to be on the record as voting for something. So, when you come to local government, it's not so much the political statement side of things, so it's more of a practical.
Well, abstaining is the same as present then? Voting present for a vote?
I suppose so. You're not saying yay, you're not saying no.
Yeah.
And yet you're not recusing yourself. That is, you don't have a conflict for recusal. You're just saying, I don't think the board should be voting on this. I think that's what you're saying.
Okay.
Understood.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Bryce, do you have any questions?
I've been asking.
Okay.
I'm good.
Thank you. So, would someone like to make a motion to accept the consideration of the amendments to the Board of Adjustment bylaws, including the 2 new concepts that Kurt put in? To accept the proposed changes as written by the secretary, including the appeal order and the counting of days.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Do we need to do roll call?
I don't think it's a roll call vote, it's just up or down, right?
You can roll call, but you don't need to. You can say
Okay.
all in favor.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Then the next order of business is a consideration of letter in support of sidewalks near 1839 B Street. And I feel sort of strange in talking about this because I was not at this meeting. I had been sick, so I didn't even get the information for it. I read the minutes today and I went and looked at the situation. But I feel that it would be better if someone who was at this meeting talked about it and the letter.
Who's the vice chair?
It's me. So we really felt it was important that we ask city to take a look at B Street because there are no sidewalks there. And with the testimony from 4Cs, they felt that there would be potentially quite a few people coming to Four Seas using public transit, and the nearest transit is up on Court Street. So they would need to walk down B Street to get to the newly created Four Seas building or location. So we felt strongly that that would be a safety hazard since there are no sidewalks, and asked that this letter be drafted on behalf of the board for signature.
Yep, and I would like to add, prior to your consideration, that I did receive a message from Four Seas and some funding that they were hoping would help them establish this use was not awarded to them. So they're not sure if they'll be able to move forward or not, but with a special exception, it does run with the land, so there is still an opportunity for a childcare use to be here. Four Seas might still be able to utilize it if they receive other funds. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that I received that message after the fact. But
So
Yes,
at
and
this-
their application actually was nested in all modes of transportation, which sidewalks was not one of them, but was a huge part of their pitch. So
So what impact would that have on the letter then? It was kind of written in the frame of that this was happening, and now.
yeah, so, I mean, at the end of the day, the Board of Adjustment did still approve a special exception request by the nonprofit Four Seas. So I think that you could either modify the letter to be, we approved a daycare use, and we think that these sidewalks are important to the area. You could modify the letter to be something of the effect of, we think sidewalks are important in this area after looking at a use here. Or you could
Wait.
approve it as, you could wait, you could approve it as is, there's all sorts of, you could do,
Well, if Kirk comes back and says, yeah, they closed down the property, then you could, authorize Kirk to, or bring it back to yourselves, or authorize
Yeah.
Kirk to, or the chair to sign it at that time, too.
so it just depends on if you want to move forward with it or not. I mean, you don't have to. This is something that we don't know what's going to happen. so.
what is the closing date?
Well, I know that they had a due diligence time frame that ended in December. So what I was told was they weren't sure that they were going to move forward, or that they weren't sure they were going to be able to move forward. That's what she told
So
me.
we could table for a month.
You could table for a month. It might be longer. I mean, your order for the property allows a childcare use to establish itself in that location. It doesn't have to be Four Seas. So it could be within 5 months, maybe a new buyer wants to do a childcare center there, they could. I might not hear about it if that happens, but, so that's where it depends on, you did approve this use in this location, so maybe you want to say, we approved the use, we think it's a good,
So in other words, since we approved that use, anybody could then come in, other than Four Seas.
Correct.
And they would be able to go ahead with what they wanted to do because we had changed
yep,
the-
subject to the conditions. And that's why any special exception, you have to view it from the light of, you're approving a use for a property.
Yeah, okay.
And you're looking at the conditions associated with that.
And
So
not
things can
necessarily-
change.
Well, the conditions are not
Yeah,
going to change
and the
regardless.
neighborhood still is without sidewalks, which we could
correct.
just draft a letter and
It's
say, hey, we do need sidewalks in a neighborhood.
And what were you saying, Larry? I think,
Since even though the applicant may change or the operator may change, the conditions don't change.
No.
I'd send the letter.
and
I agree with Larry. Send it.
I mean, in looking at the letter, I think the letter is still true. It talks about you approved a special exception request. The daycare that they had proposed is proposed to serve 120 children. I mean, it's phrased as a proposal, and then provides a needed service and you want to draw attention to the lack of sidewalks. I think that that's still a valid letter that you can send. It just may not be, as pressing. And council may take that into consideration as they're looking at how they want to budget it out, see what happens there, kind of. But I encourage them to apply for, there's community development block grant funds, which is something that 4Cs has used in the past. So it wouldn't be the same amount of funding that they requested, but, just trying to make sure that they're aware of what's possible.
How would city council know that this is not as pressing at this point, but we would still encourage sidewalks?
So they would have your minutes.
Okay.
And I mean, if you want me to, I can send this with minutes attached as an attachment, and that way they have the full context. I think that would be a way to do it too, without having to change the letter, really.
So I have a question, and it's probably based on pure ignorance because I wasn't at the last meeting, but is the position of advocacy a safe position for this board? In other words, we're a quasi-judicial. We weigh things that come in front of us, but is this a little unusual to, I don't know. I understand the need for them. I'm thinking on my street, Seymour Street, right up from along Longfellow, there's a whole side of that block that does not have sidewalk. What are we getting into here?
Well, I think there was discussion at the board at that meeting whether it should be actually a condition. And the idea wasn't, if you just put it in that one lot, that didn't make any sense because there was no sidewalk here and there. And so I don't want to speak for the board, but the board sort of said, well, I don't think that makes a lot of sense just to require this owner to put in a sidewalk here. And so there was a little more discussion. They thought, well, perhaps just letting council know, hey, there's no sidewalks on either side of B Street. There's a new childcare coming in here and just sidewalks. So it was nothing more than kind of that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope I didn't.
No,
yeah.
I think that's correct, yes.
So is it possible, let's say the city does impose a requirement on homeowners, because I don't think the city would pay for this.
So the city has infill sidewalk funds that they use from time to time. And that's determined by a mixture of city council and engineering. So if you approve the letter, I would send it probably to the engineering department and then also just include it in a council packet for them to consider. Since
I was just thinking, what would happen if, there was a requirement and then suddenly someone appealed it and it came back to us? Okay, so.
Yeah, I see your point. I understand that.
But
typically areas developed without the sidewalks, the city covers those.
the first sidewalk, and then thereafter,
Yeah, if it wasn't required at the time.
Thoughts?
Well, I'm torn between waiting, although it does go with this special exception and the use, the specific use. I would still want to encourage sidewalks there with that use. So I guess I would support sending it as long as it's kind of clear that this approved, the initial use has been put on hold by 4Cs. They're not moving forward, just so that's clear that it's not pressing and.
Well, there's no real rush on this. You could revise the letter, we could do it at the next meeting.
Yeah, I could redraft it to not be specific to 4Cs for consideration at your next meeting.
Yeah, I think
Bryce?
that makes sense.
Bryce, what are your thoughts on this? Because you three were the ones who were here
Well, I think I would send the letter just because a daycare is currently approved and there is a park around the corner anyway. And pedestrian mode of traffic was highly contingent on the applicant as all modes of transportation were considered. So I don't think it burdens anybody to actually put in sidewalks. It's just like, hey, this is a thing. Just want you to know about it. So I think it's up to council to say yay or nay, and most likely it just depends on budget anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a recommendation from us. It's not a requirement. And the council will take the responsibility for whether or not it's required. And there's all sorts of little hoops that go along with sidewalk assessments that they have to deal with. But once we make the recommendation, basically our role is done.
Any more comments?
No, I'd still say I would support the recommendation as long as it's clear that it's not necessarily tied to 4Cs, that language is changed in the letter.
So is that the motion that you would like?
So I would move to revise the letter.
Maybe just say daycare provider, not necessarily
Yeah, how about this? So that it
person
doesn't have to
providing
be,
daycare.
so it doesn't have to be postponed to a different meeting. What about on November 8th, 2023, the Board of Adjustment approved a special exception request to allow a daycare use in a low-density, single-family residential zone at 839 B Street. The daycare is proposed to serve 120 children. And then not reference 4Cs, not reference that half would be LMI, and then say the daycare will provide a much-needed service, but the board would like to draw your attention to the absence of sidewalks along the street, including along the route from the nearest transit stop, the addition of sidewalks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Considering the community-oriented nature of a daycare, promote pedestrian safety, et cetera, we understand the need to
Can
allocate
you
resources.
say something about all modes of transportation, et cetera, as well?
Much needed service, board would like to draw your attention to the absence of sidewalks, including the route from the nearest transit stop. Addition would greatly enhance the safety and accessibility of the area and will ensure a safe route for families with young children, staff, pedestrians, and others utilizing public transportation. Would contribute to the improvement of our neighborhood infrastructure, providing accessible connection. Doesn't say anything about modes of transit, but it talks about the different modes of transit. I'm just revising the letter that was.
There is a park within, 200 meters of that?
Yeah, so it
facility as
talks
well?
about the park. The sidewalk would also contribute to the improvement of our neighborhood infrastructure and provide a new accessible connection to Chaddock Green Park.
And an actual.
Understood. I just,
Yeah, I can pop up the letter if you'd prefer.
no, I emailed you before. I have to VPN into the Iowa City site, so it's not,
Well, if you can see the screen, here's the letter.
I can see it now.
And 4Cs actually is not mentioned in this letter.
They are mentioned, so the changes that I would make
Where
is
is
to
it
this
mentioned?
first paragraph.
Oh, okay,
I would approve a special exception request. I would delete this.
yeah.
To allow a daycare use in a low-density, single-family zone at 1839 B Street. The daycare is proposed to serve 120 children, and then I'd delete that, and the rest of it would remain the same.
Is a special exception usually particular to a certain party, or is it a?
Property.
No, it's to the use.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
It's to the use. It runs with the property.
Okay.
So since this special exception was approved for this property, if someone else wanted to come in and do a daycare there, they could go right ahead and do that. Now, if someone came in and decided they wanted to change the use of that property, then would they have to come back?
It depends on what the use is, and that's where the zoning code either allows things by right, it allows them with conditions that are built into the code, or by special exception. So the things that you hear are the special exception cases. So if they wanted to do like a church again, that would require a different special exception.
That would require a special exception. Because a church would probably also want a sidewalk. Or, well,
Potentially.
they may or may not, depending, okay.
And the owner could also come back and say, 5 months from now, say, I want to extend this and continue to market it to childcare. I mean, they can request anything that, in this case, it just happened to be the purchaser, the contract purchaser was going to apply for it, but the owner has the same rights since it's approved for their property. And they also had to consent to the application.
It seems like all you really need is an introductory clause to the second paragraph. Beginning, although 4C's status is in question, or how we want to phrase it, blank, a daycare will provide a much-needed so on and so forth, and leave everything else alone.
You can wordsmith it however you would like.
I'm just trying to make it simple for y'all.
Okay, but if we change any of the wording, then we cannot, then it has to be read again at the next
No,
meeting?
this is not the bylaws. The bylaws have
okay.
to be renoticed.
Okay. So we can deal with this tonight and have it end?
If you want to send it, unless you want to sit on it and wait to see what happens.
Okay, so those are our choices. We can either send it or sit on it.
I say send it.
I would say send it.
I would agree to send it with changes as indicated.
So can we have a motion to send this letter? Would someone like to make a motion to send this letter?
I would move that we send the letter dated December the 13th, 2023 to the City Council regarding a desire for sidewalks to be considered for the property at such and such, 1839 B Street, be approved.
And what changes specifically? Are we talking about deleting the two clauses that I mentioned, or would you like to add in an although sentence?
I have no problem with the letter as written. And if the majority wants an although, give me about 2 minutes and I'll come up with one. But I don't see the
Well, I do
necessity
want
for
the
it.
letter changed, however that's done. I want it made clear that it's for a daycare use. You can say originally by 4Cs, however you want to word it, but I want it made clear that this is
The
in
sidewalk?
flux.
Then all we really need to change is the first sentence, right? Special exception for
I mean,
childcare.
I would propose deleting
Right. Just deleting the 4Cs.
this line and this line, those two clauses. That's what I would propose. I
Yeah.
think that's the simplest way to do it. So basically, the first paragraph would read, on November 8th, 2023, the Board of Adjustment approved a special exception request to allow a daycare use in a low-density, single-family residential zone at 1839 B Street. The daycare is proposed to serve 120 children.
Can we just say, as proposed, the daycare is blah, blah, blah?
I mean, the
I do
daycare
like
is
the
proposed
low
to
to
serve
moderate
100.
income family verbiage, but
I mean, you could leave that if you wanted to, but that seems disingenuous because I'd be less confident that a different
Right.
Yeah,
owner would do that.
okay.
Yeah, I can do that. I would agree with deleting those. But Larry's got a motion.
Well, if you're going to eliminate the last part of the first paragraph, why don't we just say something like the introduction to the second paragraph? Such a proposed daycare will provide such and such,
That would work.
and then leave everything else alone.
Because that puts it in the future.
That allows you some, that's what you're saying is you're approving the concept.
Yeah.
You're approving the use.
So you want to leave the first paragraph the same?
No, I'm.
Oh, so make the change, make the deletions that I said, and then add such a proposed daycare will provide a much-needed service.
Such a proposed use, such a daycare use. Instead of saying the daycare, say a daycare.
Yeah. Okay. Such a daycare will provide a much-needed service in our community.
I paid a lot of money for my education.
Putting it to use.
Thank you. And we got to take advantage of it.
Finally.
Okay, so is so that is
Is the motion clear?
I'm sorry.
Can I have a clarificate, can you restate your motion so
Oh,
that I'm
man.
clear as to what it is?
I was so far ahead of the game. I would move that the request for consideration of a sidewalk infill letter sent to the city council of December the 13th, as amended in the meeting of December the 13th. Something like that. We're overcomplicating this. We really are.
So to be clear, we're deleting the reference to 4Cs, and we're deleting the reference to low and moderate
Right.
families in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
And in addition, we will add an introduction clause to the second paragraph, such
Such
a
a proposed
daycare
use
or a daycare use will provide.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Second.
That's what I move.
Second.
Does the wording, excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Does the wording of the beginning of the third paragraph pose any problems to your, amended verbiage?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow there, Mark. I'm sorry.
The beginning of the third paragraph,
Yeah.
is that unnecessarily specific? Or not?
You can change it to a daycare again.
Okay.
Change the to a.
Yep. In the third paragraph.
yeah.
Boy, we're a highly educated bunch here.
America's most educated city.
I'm sorry.
Our boards and commissions should reflect that.
Okay, so do we are we in agreement now?
Yes,
Everybody feel?
And we have a clear
Okay,
motion.
So you made
Yes.
the motion?
yes, and I think somebody has seconded it.
I second
All
it.
right.
Okay. Do we need to have a roll call? Can we just have, all those in favor of this motion, say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, consideration of meeting minutes.
I have a correction.
Perfect.
On page 7 of the packet, where Mr. Aiken from McClure Engineering Company is speaking, it's the third paragraph. I would just like an addition in the end of the last sentence. As of now, they haven't specifically looked at lighting, but will do so during that process, and it would be brought up to code if required. I would like "if required" added. And the reason is, the whole gist was that they would look at it during the site process, and Kirk had said that that would not be a component during that site planning process. That's why I wanted the condition added.
To make sure it's dealt with.
This is a minor point. If we add those words, I mean, the way it's written now, the implication is that is the statement of Mr. Aiken. That's why I'm reading that. They haven't specifically looked, it's him talking. They haven't specifically looked at the lighting, but will do so during the process and we brought up to code if required. Is that what he said? That's what we want. But is that what he said?
Sometimes there's some paraphrasing that happens as things are
Okay.
consolidated. I mean, really, it's up to you as the board to determine if the minutes reflect the discussion, but I can always look it up.
Yeah, I think that's the best way, is to confirm by listening to the recording and changing it one way or the other.
So I'll look it up and change it if it's,
If he said that, yes.
Right. I review, you, please do, and I did listen to the recording, so.
okay.
Okay. Are there any other modifications to the minutes that need to be made? If not, will we accept the minutes?
So
Oh.
moved.
Move we accept the minutes of the November 8, 2023 meeting.
Yes.
Paula moved.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Opposed? Okay, they are accepted. Okay, any other information?
Just that Paul's been reappointed for a full term now. And
Years.
And we will not have a January 10th meeting, despite what that slide in front of you says, because we don't have any applications and the deadline's passed. So we'll have a winter break and potentially be back in February, but we'll send out notices as we always do. So
Unless we want to have an informal one somewhere else.
unless you want to have another meeting for fun.
I think we should meet just on that if required question. Let's get that
There we
resolved.
go. It would be a brief meeting.
No.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
Second. You have to talk louder.
Okay.
I think we're
Happy
good.
New Year. So we are adjourned.